computer is picking up a strange signal. Here, sir, you better take a look at it.
Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Snacks. I'm Liz J. Bradley, a science fiction author and poet who adores short fiction and snacks. Each episode of Sci-Fi Snacks is a short and sweet, or salty, discussion of what I loved, what I learned, and what I snacked on while reading new-to-me short science fiction. As always, links to the short stories are in the show notes, so if you haven't read this week's story, head on over, pick up your favorite snack, and then join me as we discuss this week's story. Welcome back, listeners, to this week, episode 9 of Sci-Fi Snacks with your host, me, Liz J. Bradley. I am so excited to talk to you today about this week's snack and story. I ended up switching this story several times after my initial list of stories. So I wanted to maintain kind of a balance and not repeat any authors. But in my original list, this week's story was actually a repeat of an author who will remain unnamed, but from one of the previous stories. And I didn't want to do that because there are so many good stories out there that I want to share with you as many different perspectives as I can. So I replaced that story with one from Uncanny Magazine. And when I sat down and read that story, it was an amazing story. It was so good. But when it came down to it, I didn't feel like it was a great fit for this platform and this podcast. And I don't mean that because the story had anything wrong with it. It did not at all. What I mean is I read the story and I said, this is so important and I want to give it time and I want to give it space. But it felt like a story that if you paired it with a snack and talked about it on a fun little podcast, it felt almost irreverent because the story was really tapping into some things in the human experience that were really, really intense. And I know we've had a couple of episodes that we really dove into some stuff, but something was telling me that this wasn't the appropriate venue. And if you know me in real life, ask me about it and we will totally chat and I will share with you. DM me on social media. You can find me on Blue Sky at lizjbradley.bsky.social. And I'll let you know. And I would love to chat about it, just not on this platform. So I went to a third story. And now what's great about this is the whole goal is for me to read really widely. And I read 3 stories for this week's podcast. So the one I'm going to talk about today with you is the super fun Dix Dayton and the Miner from Mars by Liz A. Vogel from Analog Science Fiction and Fact. Liz A. Vogel writes science fiction, fantasy, mystery, espionage, and anything else that'll hold still long enough. She won the 2013 ISFIC Writers Contest with Wendy Van Houten's Was Never Like This, and her short stories can be found in Analog, Daily Science Fiction, and the anthology We're the Weird Aliens, among others. She has worked at jobs ranging from phone tech support to library assistant to light construction. On the whole, she prefers problems that can be solved by hitting them with a hammer. She does not know how this led to becoming a writer. This is coming from an older issue, their January-February 2022 issue that I had on my shelf. And I thought this was a really fun story. It worked really well with a snack I had on hand. Dee's Nuts, dill pickle flavored nuts. Made me laugh when I saw it in the grocery store. And that is spelled DEE''S. And it has this adorable old woman on the side. And clearly her name is Dee. And everyone loves her nuts. And I just thought they were fun. And then when I got to this story, I knew it was kismet because in the opening paragraph, we find out that Dix Dayton is on an asteroid and he's at a bar in this far-flung area of space. And I said, bar food, nuts with double entendre, it all was perfect. So let me tell you a little bit about this story. We meet our protagonist, Dix Dayton, and he is at this bar, and we find out it's in this kind of prefabricated, supposed to be temporary housing type situation on this asteroid. So he has parked there. He knows the bartender. He kind of knows the people. This is his neighborhood. And we find out that there is a gambling game out back. So he has a drink and then he goes out back into this other section of this prefab bar. Feels really generous to call it that. The way it's described in the story is essentially like you've got some strips of plastic and some steel beams, and that's it between you and literal death in the cold darkness of space. So rightfully, Dix is a little on edge, but he is going to join this game anyway. And we find out that there is a miner, not underage, but a miner like the person who digs minerals from the ground, who is a Martian, but human. So human Martian miner from Mars. You try to say that 10 times fast. He is at the game, and we can tell that everyone there at the table is ready to take advantage of this very new wet behind the ears guy. We go through kind of your traditional card game setup, and we've got all the ups and downs of who's going to win and who's bluffing and all of that. And then we get to the part that, feels quintessential, where he doesn't have enough money, but this miner from Mars really wants to win and he thinks he's going to win. So he pulls this weird little contraption out of his bag and is like, this is worth the money. I will bet this tonight and then I can bring the money tomorrow to buy it back from you if I have to. But he thinks he's going to win. Spoilers, he doesn't win. And our protagonist, Dix Dayton, gets to take all of his money and this weird little contraption thing that he looks at. And you can tell as the reader at this point, you're like, oh, this is important because it's being given that kind of space on the page. And you're like, you don't bring something up that's weird without it being important, especially if your protagonist looks at it and disregards it and says, oh, that can't be important. That's like a big flashing neon sign that, hey, this thing's going to be important. And surprise, it is. So Dix decides that this thing is worthless and he leaves it on the card table and goes to bed. Then in the middle of the night, everyone is woken up by these alarms sounding that essentially the hull of these prefab buildings has been breached and they can feel a breeze, and it hasn't been breached enough so that they're all instantly dead, but we definitely know there's a problem. So Dix and the bartender band together. They end up fixing it. They realize that little weird thing that Dix just left on the table is all of a sudden attached to the steel beams and is literally drilling through the wall and has opened up a little nick. So they get it all patched, and then the Port Authority comes in and they have to check the patch and make sure that everything is okay. And they're like, what the heck was going on? And we hear from the miner that, this is some really experimental new mining technology that's going to change the world. And Dix is just like, well, it almost killed us all and I hate it. And in the end, Dix gets his money, the miner gets his little contraption back, and everybody's happy. And Dix hops on his spaceship and is like, ugh, I feel so much better. I am ready to get back out into space and off of this godforsaken rock. And that's the story. So what I really love about this story was just how fun it was and the way that the world building contributed to that. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I hear over and over and over as a writer is your first sentence has to just hook you. And when we're looking in a competitive world where you're sending out queries and short stories and all of that, you get a lot of stories where they've got like a really hooky first line and then everything's downhill from there. That's not what this story did. But what this story did was from the first sentence, the first paragraph, really, it built this world that was so clear to me. It felt so real in a way that can be really hard when you're trying to build a science fiction world from nothing in a short piece. Now, this piece was about 4 pages in one of these little paperback analog books. And I don't know the exact word count, but it wasn't a very long story. So right off the bat, we need to know, where are we? What's going on? What's the vibe of this story? Like, I know it's a science fiction story because I picked up a science fiction magazine, so that's what I expect. But there can be such a huge breadth of what is considered science fiction. So right off the bat, we've got drink bulbs at a bar, and we're talking about how the liquid inside is moving around because of the low gravity. And it was just this attention to the details of how this setting makes everything different that I really liked. And I think that it's really easy as a science fiction writer or as any writer to just pick details in your story because you need to get something on the page. Okay, we're at a bar, we've got glasses, we've got beer in those glasses. But as soon as you start playing with the setting and you're in space, those things are going to behave differently. So all of these things that feel really easy if this were some bar on a planet are really different because we are on an asteroid where the gravity is different and everything. And I thought that this attention to detail was really great. And it also played a really big part in the story, which I think is so important and I really, really love, is that the card table, it seemed like such a small detail at first. The cards themselves had little pieces of metal on them, and the card table was magnetic. So we had this part where someone was dealing the cards, and you could tell we had a little moment where they were like, he must have dealt too fast or done something and the cards went flying the hand before. And he was being very purposeful this time around by making sure that the magnetic pieces connected so that the cards wouldn't fly around. Other people wouldn't see what is in other people's hands. And it was such a small detail, but what was really great about it is that it pulled double duty. So we were world building because this is a small detail that shows that the gravity is different here, that this is a different world. It makes it feel like sci-fi. That's really cool. But also it gave us a hint towards the ending of the story. And when you're writing something this short, everything you can do to pull double duty is amazing and is so helpful in creating a story that's really tight and nothing feels extraneous. You know, it's all there for a reason. You're not showing me something just to be like, oh, look at this cool piece of tech. No, you're showing me something because it builds the world and it has to do with this story in this world. Another thing I loved about this story is that it felt like there could be so much more to it. This world felt really big. It felt like you got plopped down in the middle of a TV series where, you know, the kind of episodic TV shows where you've got characters that don't necessarily have huge growth in terms of each episode, but we're getting those kind of snippets of their life. And this is just a moment in time, but you know that this character inhabits a really big world. I'm thinking a lot about kind of the TV that I grew up on, watching Bones or Castle or all of those kind of episodic shows where you get the same structure each time. We've got a crime and it's got to be solved and we have our main character and the plucky sidekick and things like that. This story felt very much like that. And when I was doing research after the fact, what's really cool is this is not the only story with this main character. So Liz A. Vogel wrote a different story with Dick Dayton, and this was the second one, and they are both in analog. I don't know which issue the first story is in, but this one was really exciting, and I love that I was kind of right on the money there with the vibes and the feel of it. And speaking of vibes, this story came from 2022, and I've been reading a lot more recent stories for most of this and trying to keep up as a new member of SIFWA. I want to be reading the stories that we're going to be voting on for nebulas and things like that. So I've been reading a lot and immersing myself in a lot of stories that are very, very recent. A lot of them have very timely themes or feels to them. And one thing that I've been seeing a lot lately is there was a call for weird Wild West. A lot of like Western sci-fi things have come out and been kind of on my radar for the past year or so. So this was kind of cool to see this Western sci-fi in something from several years back, and knowing that, you know, everything is cyclical. It all comes around. And I just really love the idea of blending the genres. And this is something that it kind of works with what I learned from this story, that you can take a genre that may feel tired or old, dusty, if you will. Westerns are not something that is necessarily super popular anymore. And if you mash that up with a different genre, in this case, sci-fi, all of those things that feel old are now seen through this different light. You know, it's not a beer sliding across the countertop to our protagonist who grabs it and drinks it down and slams it back on the table while the big bosom barmaid looks on. Instead, we've got low gravity drink bulbs flying around. And instead of playing poker or blackjack, we've got backroom games of Martian one-up. So it's exciting to see all these little nods to the genre, but then made fresh and exciting and new. And so you want to keep reading. And so I think that that's something that I would love to try with mashing up genres. I don't tend to do that, but I think that there's a lot of fun to be had there. And that's something else that I really learned, is that sometimes writing can just be fun. I have read a lot of really heavy stories. I know that right now at this specific moment in time, a lot of us are turning to creative writing as catharsis and as a place to deal with some really huge emotions and feelings and things in the world that we don't know how to deal with other than through creation. And I think sometimes I personally feel this pressure. I don't know about other writers, but I feel this pressure that every story I put out there, every story that I even attempt to sell, has to be capital I important. Because what's the point? If it's not a perfect piece of fiction that is going to make people cry and have the perfect emotional resonance, it's not worth anything. And maybe some of this is coming from, I write a lot for competitions, and you see these patterns in competitions where stories that make people cry do really well. So you can try and tailor your own submission to be that manipulative piece, and not manipulative in a bad way, but just face value of the word, manipulate someone's emotions to have them feel something is going to give them a connection to your story. And if you're looking for votes, if you're looking for likes, if you're looking for validation, that can make sense. But then I read this story and I was like, you know, I didn't cry, and that's okay. And this was fun and I enjoyed it. And the same thing goes for this weird little snack. You know, Dee's Nuts made me laugh when I saw it on the shelf at the grocery store. They've got this dill pickle wearing a backwards baseball cap on the front, and it just looked silly. And I said, you know what? I need that in my life. I need these silly little dill pickle nuts, which were delicious, by the way. If you like vinegar, if you like salt, if you like peanuts, if you're allergic, don't touch them, obviously. If you like peanuts, these are pretty great. And if you like fun sci-fi westerns, Dick's Dayton and The Miner from Mars is also great. It's inspired me. I have a story that has been collecting dust for a while that didn't feel important enough because it's just a fun little story. I had the idea of a modern day witch inherits her ancestor's house in Salem, Massachusetts, but unfortunately it's part of a homeowners association. And there's a huge battle between the president of the HOA and this modern day witch because her ancestor's house is exempt from the HOA because it was there beforehand. And I wrote this story and it just feels so silly. And it's like, well, that's not it's not dealing with anything other than the fact that like I have a personal visceral hatred for HOAs. And maybe that is an important message. Maybe that's something that the world needs. I don't know. Let me know. Hit me up on social media. Come find me on Blue Sky and tell me if you want me to finish and clean up this witchy HOA battle story, because I think I need to embrace the fact that literature can be for entertainment. I consume so much in other spaces that's just light and fluffy and fun and doesn't have to have a deeper message. And I think that we need space for those stories too, because everything can't be heavy all the time. Everything can't be a lesson or a warning. Sometimes we just need fun little Western card games on an asteroid in the middle of nowhere. Make sure you check out the show notes to see what story we are talking about next week, and check out past episodes for all of the amazing stories by women in science fiction this season. Can't wait to chat with you on social media. Reach out to Liz J. Bradley at bsky.social and keep on snacking.